friends, Chubby Meeple back here with another Kickstarter preview for you. Today we're going to take a look at the Seals of Cthulhu, designed by Sean Epperson, published by Thing 12 Games. Let's jump over to the table, I'll show you how it plays, and then I'll come back and tell you my thoughts. Setting up for a game of Seals of Cthulhu is very straightforward, and the gameplay is actually really simple as well. To set up for a game, you're going to separate the decks of cards, and there are 6 identical cards. You have the Investigator set with the blue influence tokens, and you have a Cultist set with green influence tokens. All 6 of these cards are identical, so you have a Necronomicon, a Potion, a Gate, a Shoggoth, a Gate Closure, and a Journal. And there is, and so the Investigators and the Cultists will have those same 6 cards. The kicker here is that in order to activate any of these cards, you have to own both halves of the cards, and we'll talk about how you do that here in a second. There is also the option, once you've played the basic game that includes the Shoggoth cards, you can replace the Shoggoth cards with Cthulhu cards. Again, an Investigator and a Cultist card in each hand. So you can swap out the Shoggoth cards for Cthulhu and switch up the gameplay. And there will also be some additional Elder Gods available as stretch goals that I've heard from the designer as well that can also be swapped out and vary up gameplay. So in order to start the game, what you're going to do is you're going to give the Cultist player the 6 Cultist cards, and these will form the hand of the Cultist player. So we're going to set those here with the Cultist player. You're also going to give them the 4 green influence markers, which are the tokens they'll be using to bid, so to speak, on the artifacts that are being played to the table. You're going to give the 6 Investigator cards to the Investigator player and give them the 4 blue influence markers. Now, gameplay is very simple. Before we dive into gameplay, though, I want to take a look at one of these cards and give you a bit of a breakdown as to what the cards themselves are. So we're looking at the Gate from the Cultist deck, and just this kind of an overview of the card anatomy itself. You have, at the top, you have the control value. This is essentially the victory points that this card will be worth at the end of the game. You have an influence value. An influence can, basically, you have your 4 influence markers that are used for bidding. So you start with 4 green, the Cultist does. The Investigator will start with 4 of the blue ones. These cards, as you control these cards, you can also use these cards for influence as well. And we'll talk about that here as we get to gameplay. You also have the artifact name and the artifact ability. So once I have both halves of the Gate, the Cultist half and the other half of the Gate that is in the Investigator deck, I can then activate this Gate ability. So if I control both face-up gates, I can flip one face down, and if I do, then I can flip another face-down card face up. So there's some card manipulation that goes on there. Now, gameplay. Very simple. You're going to randomly determine who the first player is, and you're going to give that player the active player token. So we'll put it down here with our Cultist player now, just for ease of the game. To start the game, the Cultist player is going to take their 6 cards in hand. They're going to choose one of the 6 cards, and they're going to play it face down in the center of the table, along with any number of influence tokens that they would like to bid for control of this card. So let's say this person, our Cultist player, bids 2 of their influence in order to control the Necronomicon that they threw down. Now, our Investigator player has 2 options. They can either take the influence offered and give the Cultist player control of the card. If they do that, they would simply take these 2 influence markers, add them to their own, and the Cultist player would then flip the Necronomicon on the table, face up in front of them, to indicate that they have control of this card. And so now they would have, in this case, they would have 1/2 of the Necronomicon needed in order to activate this artifact for its ability. The other option that our Investigator player has is, instead of taking the 2 influence and allowing the Cultist player to have control of that card. Now again, keep in mind the Investigator doesn't know what card has been played at this point, because it's literally the first turn of the game. As the game goes on, you may be able to deduce a little bit what your opponent has out on the table and what they're trying to gain control of. So we have one option. They can take the influence offered, give control of the card to the player that offered the card out. The other option they have is to bid a number of their own influence, whether that's the influence markers or the cards themselves. And if they do so, they have to put out at least 1 more. So they have to bid at least 1 higher than what the Cultist player did. So they could put 3 of their influence markers out there. Play would then come back to the Cultist player, who again could offer up 4, although in this case he couldn't because he's only got 2. So he would take the influence markers and our investigator player would flip the Necronomicon up and place it on the table to indicate that they have control of the Necronomicon. Once one of those things happens, one of the players is going to end up with control of that artifact, or control of that card anyway. The investigator player, the active player token, is then going to pass to the other player. The investigator player is going to do the same thing. So they're going to simply grab a card and throw it out here in the middle of the table and place a bid on it. Now in this case, they can use the 1 influence marker that they have, the actual physical influence marker. They could also push the Necronomicon up and offer up the 2 influence that the Necronomicon. So in this case, they would be doing a total bidding of 3. This would be something if they really wanted this card. And obviously I grabbed it random. I don't know what the card is. But so if they really wanted this card and didn't really care about the Necronomicon, they could offer this up. If our cultist player wanted to take this bid, they could either take the 1 influence as well as the Necronomicon card and turn it face up in front of them. Or, of course, they could then bid higher. So they could come in here and they could bid. So this is a total of 3. They'd have to bid a total of 4 into the middle. That would force the investigative player to take everything back, and that would give the cultist player control of this card. In this case, we have the Shoggoth card that comes up. Play will then pass back to the cultist player. The cultist player, so now we have a Shoggoth down here. Maybe we'll want to try and complete that artifact. So we're going to throw out the Shoggoth card face down, and we're going to bid 3. And just for the sakes of the demo, we're going to say our investigator player, even though they could outbid us, we're just going to say they don't, because I want to show the ability of one of these cards and how the artifacts themselves work. So our investigative player is just going to take the 3 influence, let us take this card, and now our cultist player has completed the Shoggoth card. And the Shoggoth reads, if you control both face up, you can flip 1 face down, and then flip 1 face up card that an opponent controls face down. And I can activate this ability anytime as long as it is my turn. As long as I'm the active player, I can activate this ability anytime. So I could turn this face down. Now they both have a control value of 3, which is essentially the victory points at the end of the game. So we flip 1/2 of this face down. It allows me to flip a face up card that an opponent controls face down. So I can flip this Necronomicon face down. Play will then pass to the investigator, and the game will continue back and forth until each player has taken 5 turns. And you'll know that's the case because once each player has taken 5 turns, each player will only have 1 card left in their hand because they've thrown the other 5 out on the table and made bids on them. Once both players have taken their 5 turns, you're going to look at the face-up cards for the cultist player, and you're going to total up the control value of all of the face-up cards that they control. Nothing in their hand and no face-down cards will count toward total value. So any face-up cards they control would be their total score. Any face-up cards the investigator controls would be their total score. And the winner is the player with the highest total of the cards themselves, or of the artifacts that they control. So you're going to have a total score. If the scores are tied, then the player with the most influence tokens, so not the influence value on the cards, just the influence tokens themselves. So if the control values are tied, the winner is the player who has the most influence tokens during the tiebreaker. If that's tied, it's the player with the most face-up cards. If the most face-up cards is tied, then it's the player who has the most face-up cards of their faction. So if the cultist had, if each had, 4 influence markers, 3 face-up cards, but our cultist had 2 of their own, and they only had 1 of their own, then the cultist would be the winner. So, and if the tie still exists at that point, if we've gone 3 tiebreakers deep, a tie still exists, both players lose. The cultist gets devoured as punishment for their inability to secure the city. The investigator gets fired and is mocked for their inability to put away the cultists, and they're left to fade away penniless into obscurity and shame. So there is an ability. There is a situation where both players could lose the game, and that is how you play Seals of Cthulhu. I want to take a look at the cards that are available in the game. Again, we're looking at the cultist cards. The investigator cards are the exact same cards, exact same abilities. Now, their control values do differ a little bit. So there may be, like, for example, the gate closure on the cultist is worth 1 point. The gate closure in the investigator may be worth a different number of points there. Yeah, the gate, if you take a look at the gate closure card for the investigator, you'll notice the control value is 5. So the investigator gate closure closure is actually worth more points. And that's thematic because the investigators do want to close the gates rather than leaving them open. So, but what we're looking at here, I just want to take a look at the cards themselves and take a look at their abilities mainly. So the gate closure, if you control both gate closure cards face up, you can flip one of them face down, and if you do, you can flip another face up card face down. So this becomes a pretty powerful ability. The Necronomicon, if you control both cards face up, you can swap a face down card that you control with one from your hand. So that could be a nice way to get a bigger victory point card down face up, and then if you have an ability that lets you flip a card that you control face up, you can flop that over. The Shoggoth card that we just saw, if you control both face up Shoggoth cards, you can flip one face down and then flip a face up card that an opponent controls face down. The Potion is the only card that does not require both halves of an artifact in order to activate. So I can literally, once I have this potion face up in front of me to control, I can use its ability. The potion lets me flip this card face down to flip another face down card that I control face up. So if you have the potion in front of you, you can flip it face down, and then another face down card that's in front of you, you can flip face up. So there's a way, if you flip, for example, we saw with the Shoggoth, we flipped one of the cards down. Well, now I don't control both cards face up, so that Shoggoth ability is gone, unless I can find a way to flip that card back over. The potion would allow me to flip it back up, which would allow me to then use that Shoggoth ability again. The gate, if you control both face-up cards, you may flip one face down, and if you do, then you'll flip another face-down card face-up. So that could be your card, could be an opponent's card as well. And then the journal, if you control both face-up, you can swap a face-up card that you control with one from your hand. So the Necronomicon lets you swap a face-down card you control with one from your hand. The journal lets you swap a face-up card that you control with one from your hand. So again, a nice way to switch out maybe something that's higher victory points, or maybe you have the other half of an artifact in your hand and want to be able to do that. So those are the 6 cards that are in the game. I mentioned Cthulhu and having the option to swap Cthulhu out for the Shoggoth card. So if we were to pull the Shoggoth out of the game, we could swap Cthulhu in. And what Cthulhu allows you to do is if you control both face-up Cthulhu cards, you can flip all non-Cthulhu cards face down. So he's a pretty nasty card there. There is also some variation to the game that can be added in the form of ID cards. So there are 4 ID cards for the investigators. Let's move Cthulhu out of the way here. There are 4 ID cards for the investigators, as well as 4 ID cards for the cultist. And this basically allows you to, at the start of your game, select an ID, and that basically gives you a one-time, once per game ability that you can use. So for example, if we take a look at the cultist cards, the Golden Dawn, once per game, you may force an opponent to turn their bid face up during the bidding. So whatever that bid card is, they put in the middle of the table. Once per game, I could make them flip it face up so I know what it is before I do my own bidding. The Herald of Arrival, once per game, you may replace a face down card you control with one card from outside the game, and then the new card that comes in is face down. Enforcer of Truth, at the end of your turn, you may swap your hand with your opponent. Your opponent always plays first. And then the Blade in the Mist, at the end of the game, you may sacrifice any of your opponent's influencers that you control, and you gain 1 control point for each that you sacrifice. So there's some added abilities there to move those in. Obviously, you can see on here there's placeholder art. The character art is not complete for these cards, and in fact, some of the investigator cards, in fact, all of the investigator cards don't have names. So like you had your cultist cards that had the Golden Dawn and the Blade in the Mist. These just have TBD. These haven't been named yet. Maybe something that's going to get named during the Kickstarter. I'm not quite sure there. But the effects are in place. So with this particular card, once per game, you may banish a face-down card and remove it from the game. You have this investigator that once per game you can force your opponent to turn their bid card face up. If your face-up cards equal exactly 13 control points at the end of your turn, you immediately win the game. And the final investigator ID is at the end of the game, you can arrest any of your opponent's influencers that you control. You gain 2 control points for 2 influencers and 5 control points for 4 influencers. So if, as the investigator who has the blue influencers, if I have some of the green players' influence tokens in my possession, in this case I could arrest 2 of them. If I had 3, I could arrest these 2 for 2 points. That would add 2 points to my score to add to my face-up cards. Let's jump back over and I'll give you my thoughts on Seals of Cthulhu. So that's a quick overview of Seals of Cthulhu, designed by Sean Epperson, published by Thing 12 Games. It's on Kickstarter now. Quick little 2-player game, 15 to 20 minute play time on it. Each player's only taking 5 turns, so it definitely goes quick. What I like about it, though, is the ability, there's some strategy to it, there's some deception, a little bit of bluffing that you can do that I wasn't expecting when I looked and saw the game's really only 12 cards. But you have the ability, so if I'm looking at my hand, I've got, maybe I control half the Necronomicon, it's on the table in front of me, I have the other half in my hand, so I could throw it down there and bid a bunch of my influence on it so that I can try to take control of it and have the completed artifact and of course gain its ability. Or maybe I bluff and I play something else and bid a moderate amount, try to trick my opponent into into bidding, trying to bid, and then I grab more influence from them, let them have something fake that I don't really care about, and then the next turn I can throw down the Necronomicon and have more to bid with on it. So there's some strategy there. But really like the abilities of the artifacts themselves, being able to quote unquote break an artifact to use it and then reassemble it by using other abilities, so I could use that powerful ability again. Very cool little twist there. Again, more strategy and more kind of thinking through the timing of how you want to work all of that. It's very nice. I like the art style. I like how when you have the two halves of the cards, they come together and they actually complete the artifact. It's a very neat design. I also like thematically, if you look at some of the artifacts that are there thematically, the investigator side of the artifact is worth more points than the cultist side of the artifact on some of them, and then vice versa. So the cultists have artifacts that are worth more points on their half. So if you have the ability to turn, a card face down, of course you could turn down half of an artifact, or even if you're activating one of your own artifacts, maybe you turn down, if I'm the cultist and I have the gate that's worth more points having the cultist side versus the investigator side, maybe I flip down the investigator side of the gate to activate its ability and keep the majority of the points associated with that artifact. So that's a very cool thematic twist to it too. The replayability factor in the base 12 cards isn't terribly high, but when you have the ability to add to substitute out the Shoggoth for Cthulhu or any of these other elder gods that are going to be unlocked as stretch goals over the course of the campaign, that ramps up the replayability. Of course, having the ID cards that give you one time per game abilities, that's going to ramp up replayability as well. So again, I would definitely, if this looks like something that you're looking for a good 2-player game that sets up and plays very quickly, if you're a Cthulhu Mythos fan, a Lovecraft fan, I definitely would recommend checking out Seals of Cthulhu on Kickstarter now. And until next time, keep gaming, friends.